get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Carol Levine of Energy PR. It's ENERGI PR.com. And Carol, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Since this is part of the Top Agency series, I had one on, and Carol, I think you'll appreciate this. I had Kevin Hurrigan of Spinutech. And he's had an agency since 1995. He doesn't quite beat you, but he talks about, the landscape of business, of the internet, of the agency world through the ups and the downs. So it's really interesting to hear kind of the evolution of his agency and just the business landscape in general. So check that one out with Kevin Hurrigan. Another interesting one was with Todd Taskey, and Todd Taskey runs the Second Bite podcast, and he helps match private equity and agencies. He actually helps sell agencies, and he calls it the Second Bite because some of the agencies that sell to private equity, when private equity sells again, they make more on the second bite than they do on the first. So it's interesting, again, from the agency space evaluation, what he's been seeing throughout the past decade or so in the agency space and valuations as well. So check out many more on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So Carol, we kind of call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for the host and the company so they can create amazing content and amazing relationships. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I've found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce Carol Levine. She's CEO and co-founder of Energy PR. They're a Canadian public relations and marketing communications company. Carol was also the former chair of the Canadian Council of PR Firms. She started the company nearly 35 years ago with her late partner, Esther. They've worked with some amazing companies such as Canadian Cancer Society, Bausch Health Canada, Hotels.com, Palm, and many, many more. And Carol, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure. And I thought I was a little elf running around. It's pretty much the same description.
100%, just in a different arena. But why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit more about Energy PR and what you do? And as you're doing that, for people listening to the audio, there is a video version, and I'm going to pull up their website. So just tell us more about Energy PR and what you do.
Thank you, Jeremy. So it's a story that dates back, as you mentioned, almost 35 years, which is hard to believe because I think in my brain I'm probably 20. But I started the company. I actually started my own company before Esther and I connected in 1990. And we had a belief at the time that you could be a national agency, despite the fact that you might be based in one of the provinces in Canada and you didn't have an office, you didn't have offices all across the country. And at the time, I think our biggest competitors were the multinationals. I mean, that was a huge advantage to be everywhere. We thought it would be a huge advantage to be based in a French-speaking province, but speaking English and being able to navigate the geography between two major Canadian cities or languages, Toronto and Montreal. And so we probably had more guts than brains. But we started off, the two of us in a small office in Old Montreal, which for any of your listeners who have been to Montreal, it's a beautiful part of the city, very quaint. And, we started very, very slowly. I remember one funny story was a client called up Esther. I think it was ADT, Security Systems. and they wanted to come and visit us and meet us, but they wanted to come into our office. Well, little did they know that we were sort of in this basement office at two desks, and that was the extent of it. So the two of us, rushed out. We went and we took furniture from my house, paintings, all kinds of accessories, etc. And I recall my husband walking into the office and said, "This is really familiar." I said, "Yeah, because half of it is coming out of your house." So I would say that, what is unique about energy, it was like we were very resourceful. We felt that there was no limit to what we could accomplish. And, we built on, working with ADT and working with companies like Avon, national or multinational brands. Burke's, which is a jeweler in Canada, very well known at the time. And, started to leverage all of those accounts to get, bigger accounts. So, that was sort of the rags to, I wouldn't say riches, but that was sort of the dues that we paid along the way. And there were challenges, and I'm sure you would appreciate that as we today still, all these years later, talk about male allies. But at the time, it was not easy being a woman in business, being able to go to a bank, the being able to get a bank loan or any kind of support. We really had to prove our mettle, and we succeeded at doing it. And 34 years later, energy is still alive and well, albeit a little bit in a different configuration or construct from the time, from pre-COVID time. But we continue to challenge ourselves. And I think some of the growth along the way brought us into a more specialized sector of our business. We started off as generalists. We did almost everything, and we said we would do almost anything except a garage opening. And I'm not sure if we did any of those. Maybe we came close. But over the years, we had an opportunity to really hone our skills in healthcare. And I have to say that it's probably one of the most rewarding practice areas that one could find. And I always encourage some of our staff and others starting off in public relations, on like, if you really want to create value for yourself, specialize in an area that is so important to people. Everything from health policy to legislation and the without getting political, I think the Supreme Court in the States just made a ruling yesterday or today with respect to reproductive rights. There are so many different issues that are out there that communicators and professional communicators can wrap their heads around and really test their strategic thinking and guide various stakeholders. So healthcare is something that we love. And a few years ago, just again, talking about our trajectory in that area, we were invited in 2015 by Global Health Marketing and Communications to be their Canadian affiliate. And what was so interesting about that, besides being very, very proud of the fact that we were approached, because it's a by invitation only organization, was that we would have an opportunity as a small independent agency to have access to this global network of independently owned healthcare agencies. So competing against some of the bigger players like Hill & Knowlton and Edelman and GCI and so on, and in the holding companies and worldwide organizations, we were able to now, as a boutique size agency, have the bench strength to put us in contention for some really major projects over the years. So I would say the last 10 years, the depth and scope of what we offer has really grown.
Carol, I want to talk about the evolution of services, but first, you mentioned ADT, and so I'm curious on maybe one of the first clients that you got that you were especially proud of. Because right now you can, if we're looking at the website, you can see these amazing logos that you worked with, but in the
Right.
beginning, it's not like that. So what was the first breakthrough and how did you get some of the first,
Right.
maybe the first major client when no one's worked with you before, maybe no one knew you?
Well, you said it right at the beginning, Jeremy, in your introduction when you talked about relationships. So I've always been a firm believer that relationships, in good times and bad, are critical. I make it a point, if I hear that someone has lost their job or they're fallen on hard times, or it's a client that moved from one place to another or whatever, I'm picking up the phone, I'm sending them a note, I'm going out for coffee, whatever. And it's not a quid pro quo and it's not immediate gratification. So I think we were really lucky because the first clients were not small clients. And I recall the first client, and you tried to spark my memory before in terms of some of the case studies, but so one that comes to mind is Burger King. And when Esther was working at another agency before we formed Energy, or our predecessor, Mecca Communications, both of us had been working at another place on Burger King. And it was a fascinating program. We developed a child abuse prevention program for Burger King. And it was an in-school program that was designed to help children identify what potential abuse was, and training them, or counseling them to know what feels good and what feels bad, and so on, and be able to report. And so when Esther left that agency, one of the first calls that she got was from Burger King. And why? Because of relationship. So she had been the person on the account day to day, and the client wanted to work with her. We won't get into the fact that, her previous employer was not very happy about it. But we pitched Burger King, and, they jumped, and we worked on Burger King. And then, of course, when you have Burger King, you can get ADT. And ADT was another fascinating program. We did a
How
lot of
did they
public
find you?
education. And pardon me?
How did ADT find you?
You know what? I'm not sure I remember exactly. I don't know if it was because we tried to pitch them. I don't think it was that at all. It might have been that there were reports of domestic violence or something that was going on. And we approached ADT with the idea of a program. And it was called the Domestic Violence Emergency Response Program, called DEVERS, of all things. And the strategy behind that was, who makes the buying decision for an alarm system? Generally, it's a female, from the point of view of protection. And where do law enforcement and alarm systems, and where do they gravitate to? Well, they gravitate to men. And law enforcement is tough and rough, and women need help, and so on and so forth. And we came up with this program where we would partner with law enforcement across the country in different centers, and ADT provided them with a hands-free alarm. I mean, it was technology that existed, but any woman that was deemed in a situation of immediate danger was given this alarm through a women's shelter. And it was all coordinated with the police. And if she pressed the alarm, the police would not be calling the house or calling or whatever. They would treat it as an emergency and they would show up. And we launched that program in 25 Canadian cities, often with, the provincial ministers or premiers, and with law enforcement, RCMP, our Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And so that was, just another fascinating program that went on for quite a while. And I think it may have made its way into the US as well. at one point. But as all with all these things, they have their lifespan and the amount of time that a client will invest in them. So it's not indefinite.
It's really interesting, Carol, when you talk about this. I'm curious, when you go to pitch ADT, like there's a lot of, really amazing brainstorming strategy that goes into it. And it's really a blank canvas. When you go to pitch ADT, what were your thoughts on why and how you were going to pitch this? Because like you could probably brought up a million different ideas for them.
Well, the whole pitch process is really interesting in and of itself because it starts with what's the problem? It's the first thing we ask is what's keeping you up at night, or what are the pain points? Where could your business improve? Where are you having a roadblock? So starting with the problem but from there also looking at a briefing, which I have to tell you, because you may have encountered this in other conversations with marketers or agencies, which is the whole RFP process, and how do you get a piece of business, whether it's ADT or anybody else. Number one, it's usually competitive, and number two, often you have to give a lot to potentially get something. So in the case of ADT or any other client that has an issue or problem, it's really getting a brief, and it can't be sort of this superficial kind of description. It's really got to be concrete. It has to have some KPIs associated with it in terms of what does success look like? What is it a media play? Is it a marketing situation where you're going to look at various tactics like podcasts, sponsored content, earned media, influencers, and other things. And once you have a really good idea, then you sit down as a team over pizza and pop or wine or whatever, and really brainstorm. I think the other key part for ADT and for more current clients is research, and the kind of research that we can now do with technology. So historically, you could do market research, you could do a focus group, you could speak to a couple of people. Today, you can do social listening, you can do landscape analysis, you can still do the traditional, but just imagine using technology to tell you, what people are saying about your brand online, what platforms they're using, what are some of the conversations they're having, what are the themes, that rise to the top. So we are using technology, we've been doing this for years, but really getting a pulse on not what a small little group is saying and not what a biased group is saying, but really what, a broad audience is saying and where they're saying it and the language that's resonating with them. You could be using a word that doesn't have any meaning to the audience. And, you think that that's the buzzword because some smart person, told you. But in fact, you have to use the language that is commonly used. And you also have to write at a level that people can understand. And I think, that's, all communicators are understanding that you really need to speak to people like the regular people with regular words.
Cool. That's really helpful. I love how you broke that down, because part of the process is to kind of start with the problem and ask those questions on what's keeping them up at night, what's blocking them, what the problem is, and then kind of defining KPIs from there, and then doing deep research to find out more on what that program or whatever will look like. So you have a specific kind of discovery and methodology to come, even though all these companies are different, because I know you work at ADT to Palm to Burger King, but you're taking a certain methodology and approach to all of them to come to a real specific solution. You mentioned It's really amazing the causes, even from like the beginning of your company, from Burger King to helping with child abuse to ADT with domestic violence. So it's pretty amazing what the different causes you've been able to contribute to. I want to talk about the services for a second and how your services have evolved. So in the beginning, what your services look like, and then what do the services look like now? Because I know when I look at your services page, you have a lot of capabilities, but where did it start? And then we can talk about how it's evolved.
That's a great question, because the definition of public relations is something that is, it's theoretically, it's the relationship between an organization and its various publics. I don't know what that means.
It's very
Often I
broad.
would tell my
Yeah.
I would tell my parents, like, they would say, "What do you do?" I'm like, "I don't know. What do I do? I get companies in the newspaper, on radio, or TV." It was very hard to make that sound like a profession. But at the beginning, it really was using traditional media. And the beginning for me, again, was, many years ago. And it's using traditional media, whether it's print, newspapers, magazines, and so on, or radio talk, news, and television, to cover a story that you helped your client create. So it included that, and that was really how we launched products, how we dealt with issues, how we advocated. It was really to try to get ink or to get airtime. That has changed as the whole communications landscape has changed. And, is there a conflict or a fight or a territorial dispute between who owns what? So at our public relations agency, we do social media. We write content, or we guide content pillars. So we might create the content pillars and do all kinds of research, and then the client might write the content. We may write the content. Digital. We're not a web design firm, but we guide our clients in terms of what should their website say and look and do. So the content of it, and then, are these the right images to reflect the content? And someone might say, well, why don't you just go to a web design agency? The truth is that public relations typically sticks by that client on their communications journey, for want of a better word. And so that website, the impact that it's going to have, the changes, the refresh, the new content, etc., is something that we want to pay attention to and be involved in. We don't have to necessarily lay it all out, but we guide on strategy. So that's new. The social media, the social listening is another part of what we do. Crisis communications.
Talk
Oh
about the
my
social
goodness.
listening for a second before you get into crisis.
Sure.
And what kind of
Yeah.
things do you do
So
around that?
the social listening, again, is using different tools. Like, it might be a Radian6, it might be a Meltwater, it may be other technology platforms, and some are proprietary, to be able to understand who's saying what, how often they're saying it, who's following who has, we may get caught up with the number of followers, but that's really not as relevant as, are they the right followers, and what are they saying? Are they engaging? So the whole analytics and the whole listening is another part of the equation in terms of what we're doing. And I think that drives content. So understanding, doing that social listening, and understanding what we need to talk about, how often we should be talking about it, and who's engaging, and who should we follow, and who should be following us, who's interested in what we have to say or what our clients have to say. We want to know who those stakeholders are, which stakeholders a client may be asked for donations from 10 companies in this similar type of area. Well, which ones have a better relationship with their patients or physicians or so on? So you really want to get those insights, not because, we have to be there, but, the data is showing, these physicians are very active on social. We want to be able to get their attention. This is one way we can get it. So that's the listening, which I think is, again, part of the research and the discovery, certainly in terms of developing a new plan. Then the crisis is also something that is increasingly important. It's not always a crisis. Sometimes it's an issue that if you get into the picture quickly, it doesn't become the crisis. And a lot of that is around key message development. So, I last week I did a media training with one of our healthcare clients, and we spent the morning looking at the key messages, refining the key messages, doing mock interviews, filming them, critiquing them, getting, there were 4 people, getting some of the other people to say, well, how could he or she have done it a bit better? What would you change? And then again, educating clients on the changing media landscape, how to bridge difficult questions, how to avoid speculation, a whole host of things. And, this was actually a pre-launch initiative. And then an issue cropped up and they had all their messages and they were well prepared. And they, the question I ask at the end is like, how do you feel right now? And it's, yeah, you know what? I'm a lot more comfortable, and it's only going to get better with practice. So, we give them a manual and encourage them to practice amongst themselves because, nobody likes to do a run through. So crisis communication and media training and workshops, from a preparation standpoint, another part of what we do. So yeah.
So on that
events,
point for a second on the
yeah.
crisis management, so like a company may be launching something and they'll be like, yeah, we should really get some training on this as we're launching, getting a lot of questions. So they'll bring in your company to kind of go through and train them because they are going to be probably launching a bunch of media. I'm curious, again, you're going through best practices, you're going through their messaging, you're critiquing across a lot of the companies you've worked with. What are some of the common mistakes that they make off the bat when you're in there with them, their initial run through, and you and other team members are giving feedback? What are some of those common mistakes that people make?
Well, I love it. I love the question because we tell them, first of all, we tell them nothing's off the record. That's number one. Or maybe it's not number one. It's number 2. Number 1 is never say no comment. They want to run. They're afraid of looking bad. The first question we ask in the media session is, what do you hope to get out of this session? And what are you worried about? If they're worried about looking bad, if they're an employee, they're worried about disappointing the higher ups. They're worried about their messages being misunderstood or miscommunicated. So if they're not clear, they're generally not worried about not getting out the key messages. They're pretty good on that, I think, with a little bit of practice. But it's that whole fear of the unknown. And, we ask them to describe what they think a media interview is like. And they'll say it's like going into a minefield or falling down a deep, dark hole. And, we try to turn that around and say, no, it's really like doing a business interview. And we encourage them to feel that they have an agenda, that they go into the meeting, and you should go into any meeting with an agenda. And these are the things you want to get out of it. And you have to keep that in your mind, regardless of the question that is being asked of you. you have your answer, and you have to figure out creatively a way to get that answer out, almost irrespective of how the question's asked. So, uh, you know, that's part of it. And the other thing that we do, in addition to the key messages, we do Q's and A's, but we do a really long list. So it's almost like being mean-spirited, but we try to come up with every question that we can think of, every miserable, horrible, painstaking question that they could be asked. And we try to come up with a reasonable answer, that is going to be some iteration of that key message. And we find, again, just giving them that and letting them know that, you know what, I don't have to be so creative. I don't have to come up with 20 answers. I have to remember my messages and find a way to, work them in. So yeah, that's the media training is really a fascinating exercise in, I think, psychology.
Yeah, I love that. Really, the first thing it sounds like you do is like you shift their mindset, because their mindset is into this really dark place from what they're picturing, and then you help them view it in a positive light and treat it to something that they know, which is like a meeting agenda. And then it's really about preparation for them and preparing for all the worst case questions. And if they're prepared for those, then they can handle everything. So, no, thanks for walking through that. I'd love to, I love what you do in getting the creative juices flowing by talking through a couple case studies, because when I look at your page and case studies, it gives, whatever business someone's in, at least for me, I could speak for myself, looking at some of these case studies gives me ideas on our business, right? And so I'd love to hear how you help some of these businesses. And I wanted to start with hotels.com. That one stuck out to me on the page because of the, I don't know if people have seen the commercials before of Captain Obvious, I think it is. But talk about what you did with hotels.com.
Well, hotels.com, I mean, it's obvious. Everybody loved the character. And, it was a challenge to get him up to Canada. So, again, understanding that, in the US, the population's so much larger, the number of media are so much larger. It's a little bit more difficult here. One of the challenges with travel and tourism and hospitality media, again, is getting them to displace themselves and to, to actually attend an event. And so we lobbied heavily to try to get for hotels.com to send up their, I wasn't going to say
Spokesperson.
Spokesperson.
I don't want to say mascot, but it's, yeah, it is.
I didn't want to say mascot, and thank you for the spokesperson. I was struggling for that. But
so the idea was like, if you could get the Captain Obvious to come, that would attract a kind of an event, a media event. So what happened from there?
Yeah, so we rented a beautiful, two-story suite at the Soho Hotel, Metropolitan Soho Hotel in downtown Toronto, and invited travel and hospitality media there. We also had a representative from hotels.com that could talk about some of the new technology they had for their online platform. But the draw was Captain Obvious, and was taking pictures, that was taking pictures with him that they could post. And so, how do you evaluate something like that? Well, how far did that message go? And, who were you able to bring out? And, that was a success. And of course, you have to understand he comes with his suitcase. You'd never recognize Captain Obvious, on the street if he was out of uniform. But he was definitely the star, the star of the show. And it was an opportunity again to promote the travel products that hotels.com had. We've done so many different types of of projects. Again, right now and over the last number of years, we've been focusing our business, I would say, probably 90% in health, but not necessarily strictly scientific, although that is certainly a large chunk. But I think what we all the folks on our team find very rewarding are projects where we get to help create awareness, and where we can talk about disease prevention and health promotion. One example would be, and we just actually won an award I think last week, from the Canadian Public Relations Society. We won an award for World Cancer Day, and that's February the 4th. It's a global event. There's a lot of competition for news around cancer. Canadian Cancer, although they're the major voice for cancer in Canada, they do compete with, Lung Cancer Association and prostate cancer and just many other organizations. So it was really important to be able to tell the story, do storytelling with individuals. Over the last couple of years, the community of cancer patients has really been hit with COVID, with delayed diagnoses and so on. And so you'd think that it would be an easy sell, but it's not. And so we were really excited to be able to generate, I think it was something like 38 million. Remember, our population in Canada is about 40 million people. So a very, very high penetration in terms of getting that story out there, where you have authentic stories that are coming from either those living with cancer or people, caregivers. So that was really, very rewarding. We've done a lot in oncology.
Speak to the Canadian Cancer Society, the World
Yeah.
Cancer Day, for a second, and what
Yeah.
were some of the elements that you think made it so successful with all the noise out there and cutting through that?
There were two things, I think. One was there was data. So Canadian Cancer Society had done a survey talking about the financial impact of cancer, and the burden, the cost burden to families, people missing work, taking loved ones to treatment, individuals missing work, etc. So there is a financial, there was a big financial component, and they have data, and media love data that is applicable to their country or province or whatever. So I think that certainly was helpful. I think the other thing are the stories. There is nothing that beats the authenticity, the empathy that comes from someone telling their story that is relatable, where somebody, everybody has been touched by cancer. So when you can, harness those stories in a meaningful way, I think that's, super, super important. And that is almost like a best practice. Almost all of the pharmaceutical launches that we do, even for a new product, which is really a scientific announcement. Okay. It's a new molecule. It's a new treatment paradigm that's been discovered. And, you send out a 4-page release, and it's got all the details and all the side effects. And you just passed one with Jamie Campbell, who was a TSN, a sports network reporter for the Toronto Blue Jays. And, we did a launch for, a new oncology product for our client Beijing. And, we learned that Jamie was, had also been diagnosed with CLL, form of blood cancer. And, through his physician and serendipity and a bit of luck, Jamie agreed to talk about his story. And that was, the impact of something like that is just amazing. And what does that do? In some cases, it really sends somebody to their doctor to say, you know what, I haven't been feeling well. I don't want to let this go. I'm not saying that was the case in that particular campaign, but in many cases, when you talk about symptoms, for a host of diseases that may not be, very visible or very noticeable, and someone says, that sounds a lot like how I've been feeling, going to see my doctor, that means getting somebody treatment earlier and it improves their health outcome. So it has to be a win.
I've experienced that many times where someone will tell me a statistic and I don't even know what to do, but until I hear a story that directly impacts
Yeah.
me emotionally, that's when I tend to act 100, so definitely. I love that, having the data, but also backing it up with specific emotional stories that hit home. And speaking of, we were talking about obviously the the cancer work that you've done in cancer, and I wanted to talk about your partner, Esther, and talk about your partnership with Esther.
Wow. Thank you for bringing that up. It's despite the fact that it is really so hard to talk about, it's a story that should be told. And so just a little bit of context. Esther and I crossed paths at an agency. I had an office. She was working there. We instantly hit it off. I went out on my own and I said, Esther, come. And she said, no, 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 I'm not ready yet. I don't know enough. I have to pay my dues, etc. So we stayed in touch. And then finally, when she made the quantum leap, it was the two of us, as I described at the beginning, is, two young people, women sitting there with two gray desks in an empty space that was then outfitted by my home furniture. And we were so different on so many levels. Esther was, fun and gregarious and just everybody loved Esther. She was just a joy, very magnetic personality, almost 5'11". I'm about 5'1". So as people joke, we were joined at the hip and neck. We just had different strengths. I was sort of the more cerebral and serious and, good cop, bad cop. She was always the good cop and I was always the bad cop, to the extent that people thought that she worked for me, but we were equal partners. And we went on and through the, business, the meteoric rise and fall of business, good and bad, and weathered, the economic downturn of 2008 and, the whole pandemic. And then just over the space of 1 week, Jeremy, she wasn't herself, and she was having arguments with some people, and she was just off. And she called me on a Monday morning and said, I can't come into the office. I can't use my computer. I can't use my cell phone. I think I'm going to go to the doctor. I said, well, call the doctor. Anyway, the doctor told her to go to the hospital right away. And within 4 hours, she was diagnosed with glioblastoma. And, for your audience, whether it's John McCain or Beau Biden or, and Ted Kennedy, the celebrities that have been diagnosed with glioblastoma, it's an absolutely horrible form of fatal brain cancer. And, so Esther had surgery. She lived for 16 months. She was never the same after, and we never had a transition. We never had a real goodbye. So the loss has really been challenging, as I joke with a lot of sarcasm. She was my exit strategy, and she went and died on me. But I will love Esther forever, and her legacy certainly lives on. Just the other day, and I have so many friends in the U.S. in public relations because, and partly because Esther was the co-chairman of our spring conference of the Public Relations Society of America. So we partied with our colleagues all over the US, and someone posted a picture the other day about missing her. I'm like, you can't do this to me. It's just too much. But I think this podcast really would not have been complete without that acknowledgement. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, Carol, I want to thank you. And, her legacy lives on through you and through the company and all the amazing work that you have done throughout the years. So I just want to thank you for sharing your lessons, your journey with us. And I want to encourage everyone to check out energypr.com to learn more and more episodes of the podcast. And Carol, thanks so much. And we'll see everyone next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Have a great day.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.